The Trump administration has detained and is trying to deport student activist Mahmoud Khalil. After his detention, the White House gloated on social media, Shalom, Mahmoud. This is a very critical moment now to free Mahmoud and also to fight for our free speech rights here in this country. To discuss further, I'm joined by constitutional lawyer Mara Verheyden-Hilliard. Mara, you and I began to work together back in 2019 when I sued the state of Georgia over its anti-BDS law, an egregious First Amendment violation, and you were my representative alongside CARE. So it's really great to have you back on Empire Files today to break down the flagrant unconstitutionality of the pending deportation of student activist Mahmoud Khalil.
Well, I think what we're witnessing right now with Mahmoud Khalil and the efforts throughout the Trump administration are exceptional, extraordinary, and unconstitutional.
This is what's fascinating is there's this kind of debate raging on about whether or not the First Amendment applies to green card holders and not just U.S. citizens. Can you first just clarify that point?
The First Amendment applies to persons inside the United States. It is a constitutional requirement that the government cannot single people out, punish them, or suppress speech because the government is ideologically opposed to that speech. That is exactly what we're seeing happen right now with Mahmoud Khalil, who was abducted by DHS agents and taken away from his family, his wife, who was 8 months pregnant, and sent to a center in Louisiana.
And Marco Rubio followed up by declaring on X, formerly Twitter, saying, We will deport green card holders. And then Trump, of course, followed up with his own statement of declaration, stating that this is the first of many that will incur the same fate, Mara. What does that mean exactly? Can we just break down? Because, look, I'm a product of the war on terror. I've seen a lot. And at this point, this does seem to be one of the most authoritarian and kind of terrifying moments of unconstitutionality. Hamas aligned is their only accusation here. So what does that even entail to them? I mean, you said that it could be as loose as just someone calling for a ceasefire means that they're aligned with Hamas, but really break that down because that's a lot of Trump supporters and a lot of the Trump administration is backing this decision by saying, look, he provided material support for terrorism. He was passing out leaflets that could be construed as supporting Hamas because it was pro-Palestine. What does that mean if green card holders are now going to be deported for simply expressing speech?
I think it would be helpful to put this really in the larger context of what the administration has said, what it has said it's going to do, and what it plainly is attempting to do when it comes to speech that is in support of Palestine, speech that has opposed the US backed genocide in Gaza. And from the beginning, the Trump administration, with its first executive orders, began laying out certain language indicating that they were going to be targeting people based on their speech, based on their advocacy. They had language about coming after persons who they asserted were seeking to overturn the culture upon which the Constitution was founded, just a straight out rallying cry to white supremacists. And they were putting this in their context of their uh, completely false presentation of basically apprehending terrorists in the United States, which is an effort to go after immigrants, undocumented people, and with a broad brush, target all both immigrants and organizations that are supporting immigrants in the United States as terrorists or supporting terrorists. We see this also then extended in the context of Palestine advocacy and those who have demanded a ceasefire. So the administration has announced then in subsequent executive order on the 29th that it was in its combating anti-Semitism order, completely abusing, as so many in the right wing have done, the term anti-Semitism, because of course we all understand and believe that anti-Semitism is abhorrent. This is this continuing effort to equate criticism of Israel with anti-Semitism. But the administration is seeking to use that as a legal leverage point to then say both that anyone who is engaged in criticism of Israel or criticism of the US backed war on the Palestinian people and genocide is engaged in anti Semitic activity. So they want to use that to be able to both say that they are engaged in discriminatory conduct, but they want to take it a step further. And this is what we're starting to see, which is what was being foreshadowed when it comes to Mahmoud Khalil. What they are trying to do now is say that people who call for a ceasefire, people who have stood in solidarity with the right of Palestinians to have freedom and liberation and against oppression, are somehow also, quote, aligned with Hamas. That was the language that the administration used in response to the demands for freedom for Mahmoud Khalil. So, what they're saying is that if you, as a person in the United States, are calling for a ceasefire, and if Hamas was also calling for a ceasefire, or if you are calling for freedom and liberation for the Palestinian people, and Hamas is calling for freedom or liberation for the Palestinian people, that somehow is a quote alignment that then labels someone in their mind potentially excludable. Of course, it is not. Of course, it is not excludable to believe those views, to advocate for peace. But that's what they're trying to do.
Well, I think this is the most dangerous part of this is this Hamas alignment allegation based on nothing at all other than this tenuous, link that essentially is rhetoric that could be similar in terms of calling for a ceasefire, calling for a cessation to massacres. Somehow you're aligned with Hamas if you're just opposing the genocide that we've all been witnessing on our phones for the last 15 months. And that's what makes this extraordinarily kind of a dystopian moment. I want to comment on Khalil's character and why he was even a leader in the student movement. I'm going to quote a fellow student activist, Miriam, who posted, quote, Mahmoud did everything that administrators claim they wanted from us. He was unmasked. He was extremely tactful with his words. He was kind, patient, even with those who dehumanized him. He always stayed rational and calm. He was a lead negotiator precisely because of these qualities. He extended grace to those who didn't deserve it. The fact that the Trump administration did not actually single out someone who used inflammatory rhetoric or engaged in violence, but actually singled out Khalil. Do you think this is a trial balloon, Mara? I mean, does a lot hinge on this, and is it an unprecedented case?
It is an unprecedented case, to my knowledge. I mean, certainly, if you go back and look at the crackdowns against the movement, the removal of persons like Emma Goldman and others in history, we have it is not unprecedented to see the state use its authority, including the State Department and other agencies, use their authority against political movements in the United States in order to obstruct, to deport, to repress. Certainly, you could see that with, Paul Robeson. You can see that with William Worthy. Over and over again, the State Department tries to use its controls, its powers to target political activists. But certainly within our time, we have seen nothing like this. It is completely unconstitutional. It is fundamentally a violation of the First Amendment in all respects. For the administration to take speech just because it opposes it ideologically and wrap it up and announce that it's terrorism. And then this incredible stretch of suggesting that there's some equal sign between speech in support of Palestinian people or speech that is opposing an extraordinary genocide and saying that that is somehow support for an FTO. It is not. Everyone who has read the Constitution or even heard of it understands it is not. The administration knows that it is not. But this is part of their broader agenda. In that same January 29th combating anti-Semitism order, they issued a fact sheet. And the fact sheet that came along with it said explicitly that they intended to target persons who were engaged in political speech or views that they labeled as leftist, left-wing, or quote, anti-American. And they were wrapping that all up in the same context as this attack on people who have been um, issuing statements, marching, rallying, organizing, the brave students on campus who are demanding divestment from genocide. This is their effort in a really despotic manner to try and crack down on dissent in the United States. And their first target is, of course, the Palestine movement, because they know and hope that people will turn away, that people who don't care about this will accept a demonization of the Palestine movement. But they are also doing the exact same thing to the immigrant rights movement. They are doing this in their own way with the environmental justice movement, calling them domestic terrorists. Across the board, they're abusing and misusing authority that relates to national security or terrorism in order to target all those in the United States that they oppose, whose viewpoints they oppose. Because in truth, they know that the biggest threat to this authoritarian grab, what we're really witnessing is a coup in real time, this fundamental threat to basic democratic principles. They know that the thing they have to worry about the most is dissent, is organization, is the movement of the people. And if they can terrorize people, if they can threaten to arrest people, if they can threaten to jail people, they are hoping to fully suppress that speech and movements for justice.
And in fact, a White House official actually, ran to Barry Weiss's press outlet, the Free Press, quote unquote, and actually admitted that Khalil was arrested because he was, quote, a threat to the foreign policy of the United States, end quote. I mean, it's not, they said the allegation here is not that he was breaking the law. I mean, really laying it bare there, Mara.
Well, there's an acknowledgement. He's not breaking the law. He did not do anything wrong. The single reason that he has been picked up is because of his political speech, and that is it. And that is their basis. And even picking him up, it shows the breadth of their attacks and their willingness to just violate laws, process, the Constitution across the board. Picking him up as a green card holder, as if they could summarily deport him, which is not within their authority. These threats against others who are on student visas. They've been echoing fascist organizations in the United States who claim that they're drawing up deportation lists. You have the administration, the federal government, the executive branch, acting in service to ideological groups that are exceptionally dangerous and using state authority to crack down based on viewpoint.
So, Mara, I guess that brings us to what happens next, because obviously a judge has blocked the deportation, but what power does that have? I mean, what power do the courts have if you have kind of this despotic leader who's willing to override the court's decision and who's essentially bought out a lot of the judges in the country? It does seem like this kind of flagrant lawlessness is almost just an aside from, you know, what the priorities are. It's like whatever the courts decide, it just seems like they're going to barrel through this agenda. So I guess tell us what can happen now, once this judge has made that decision.
Well, his attorneys have been in court today. They're seeking his immediate release. They're seeking his return to New York. They are challenging the ability of the administration to conduct any form of deportation. And they're challenging the right of the administration to conduct any activity based on targeting someone for their First Amendment activity. So I think we will see obviously, how this plays out. But across the board, that is why we all learn in civics that we have three branches of government. The idea is that you must have checks and balances, because when you have an aggregation of power into any one entity, you have authoritarianism. And you can see the obedience of Congress to this administration. The question is how much the judges will maintain an independent role. And then, of course, that does raise the next question, which is whether or not the administration will simply override or uh, be in contempt of judges' orders. But it is a very dangerous game to start going down that path. And it is basically a question that everyone has to be asking themselves, because these are the basic principles and the structures that keep the United States afloat. Even if we have disagreement and question whether or not the justice system is just, which over and over again we see that it is not, in the absence of these basic structures, you have a collapse of the system. And that is the question, whether or not this administration is going so far as to collapse the system, and what will be the response? What will be the response from the people in the United States if they are taking those steps as they appear to be taking them? That's the question. When you have a coup that appears to be being carried out in front of you, a coup against fundamental democratic principles, we all have to decide, how are we going to respond? How do we stand up? How do we fight back?
And if we don't act now, Mara, I do fear where this is going to go, especially with the promise that this is the first of many. Any closing thoughts on just where this is all gone? I mean, the last time I talked to you on camera was, at the height of our battle against Georgia to try to override their anti-free speech legislation to suppress pro-Palestine speech. And here we are, several years later, 15 months of unrelenting slaughter and just this crackdown on pro-Palestine speech like never before. I mean, any closing words on that?
Look, for anyone that's been thinking they can wait it out or keep their head down or see what happens, we can see what's happening. They have said what they're going to do. They're attempting to implement what they've said they're going to do. They are targeting people based on political activity, based on political viewpoint. They are engaged in a very significant remaking of fundamental democratic rights, or an attempted remaking. And so the question for all of us is, what can we do? Every person needs to be acting in a way that stands up, that is organizing with others, that is in fact taking advantage of our right to speak out, our right to dissent, our right to free speech, because that is actually how we have the ability to make change, to hold on to what we believe in, and to push forward for the changes that should happen in society. If we are silent, it is the worst thing that we can do. It will not protect us. Silence in the end is acquiescence, and acquiescence will destroy the basic principles that we all believe in.